Welcome, 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 my lovely brothers and sisters. Welcome to a new live Oransje book reading. Today I will read through the last sections of paper 95, and we are going to start with a story, a little historic story about the Remarkable Ikhnaton. And then we travel to the Salem doctrines in Iran, and from there we end the journey with the Salem teachings in Arabia. So let us see. Sorry. So let us see what the Oransje book is telling us. So I leave this screen and we go to screen share so that everyone can read along with me instead of only listening. All right, point 5, the Remarkable Ikhnaton. The teachings of Amenemopi were slowly losing their hold on the Egyptian mind when, through the influence of an Egyptian Salamite physician, a woman of the royal family espoused the Melchizedek teachings. This woman prevailed upon her son, Ikhnaton, Pharaoh of Egypt, to accept these doctrines of one God. Since the disappearance of Melchizedek in the flesh, no human being up to that time had possessed such an amazingly clear concept of the revealed religion of Salem as Ikhnaton. In some respects, this young Egyptian king is one of the most remarkable persons in history and in human history. During this time of increasing spiritual depression in Mesopotamia, he kept alive the doctrine of El Elyon, the one God. In Egypt, thus maintaining the philosophic monotheistic channel, which was vital to the religious background of the then future bestowal of Michael. And it was in recognition of this exploit, among other reasons, that the child Jesus was taken to Egypt, where some of the spiritual successors of Ikhnaton saw him and to some extent understood certain phases of his divine mission to Oransje. Moses, the greatest character between Melchizedek and Jesus, was the joint gift to the world of the Hebrew race and the Egyptian royal family. And had Ikhnaton possessed the versatility and ability of Moses, had he manifested a political genius to match his surprising religious leadership, then would Egypt have become the great monotheistic nation of that age. And if this had happened, it is barely possible that Jesus might have lived the greater portion of his mortal life in Egypt. Never in all history did any king so Never in all history did any king so methodically proceed to swing a whole nation from polytheism to monotheism as did this extraordinary Ikhnaton. With the most amazing determination, this young ruler broke with the past, changed his name, abandoned his capital, built an entirely new city, and created a new art and literature for a whole people. But he went too fast. He built too much, more than could stand when he had gone. Again, he failed to provide for the material stability and prosperity of his people, all of which reacted unfavorably against his religious teachings when the subsequent floods of adversity and oppression swept over the Egyptians. Had this man of amazingly clear vision sorry, and extraordinary singleness of purpose had the political sagacity of Moses, he would have changed the whole history of the evolution of religion and the revelation of truth in the Occidental world. During his lifetime, he was able to curb the activities of the priests, whom he generally discredited, but they maintained their cults in secret and sprang into action as soon as the young king passed from power. And they were not slow to connect all of Egypt's subsequent troubles with the establishment of monotheism during his reign. Very wisely, Ikhnaton sought to establish monotheism under the guise of the sun god. This decision to approach the worship of the universal Father by absorbing all gods into the worship of the Son was due to the counsel of the Selamite physician. Ikhnaton took the generalized doctrines of the then existent Aton faith regarding the fatherhood and motherhood of deity and created a religion which recognized and also which recognized an intimate worshipful relation between man and God. Ikhnaton was wise enough to maintain the outward worship of Aton, the sun god, while he led his associates in the disguised worship of the one creator of Aton and supreme father of all. This young teacher king was a prolific writer, being author of the exposition entitled The One God, a book of 31 chapters, which the priests, when returned to power, utterly destroyed. Ikhnaton also wrote 137 hymns, 12 of which are now preserved in the Old Testament book of Psalms, credited, unfortunately, to so-called Hebrew authorship. And in actuality, these 12 psalms are not of Hebrew authorship at all. It's unfortunate that the Orange book is not mentioning which psalms are in actuality of Ikhnaton. The supreme word of Ikhnaton's religion in daily life was righteousness, and he rapidly expanded the concept of right doing to embrace international as well as national ethics. This was a generation of amazing personal piety and was characterized by a genuine aspiration among the more intelligent men and women to find God and to know Him. In those days, social position or wealth gave no Egyptian any advantage in the eyes of the law. The family life of Egypt did much to preserve and augment moral culture and was the inspiration of the later suburb family life of the Jews in Palestine. The fatal weakness of Ikhnaton's gospel was its greatest truth, the teaching that Aton was not only the creator of Egypt, but also of the whole world, man and beasts, and all the foreign lands, even Syria and Cush, besides this land of Egypt. He sets all in their place and provides all with their needs. These concepts of deity were high and exalted, but they were not nationalistic. Such sentiments of internationality in religion failed to augment the morale of the Egyptian army on the battlefield, while they provided effective weapons for the priests to use against the young king and his new religion. He had a deity concept far above that of the later Hebrews, but it was too advanced to serve the purposes of a nation builder. Though the monotheistic ideal suffered with the passing of Ikhnaton, the idea of one God persisted in the minds of many groups. The son-in-law of Ikhnaton went along with the priests back to the worship of the old gods, changing his name to Tutankhamun. The capital returned to Thebes, and the priests waxed fat upon the land, eventually gaining possession of 1/7 of all Egypt, and presently one of this same order of priests made bold to seize the crown. But the priests could not fully overcome the monotheistic wave. Increasingly, they were compelled to combine and hypnate their gods. More and more, the family of gods contracted. Ikhnaton had associated the flaming disk of the heavens with the Creator God, and this idea continued to flame up in the hearts of men, even of the priests, long after the young reformer had passed on. Never did the concept of monotheism die out of the hearts of men in Egypt and in the world. It persisted even to the arrival of the Creator Son of that same Divine Father, the one God whom Ikhnaton had so zealously proclaimed for the worship of all Egypt. So the weakness of Ikhnaton's doctrine lay in the fact that he proposed such an advanced religion that only the educated Egyptians could fully comprehend his teachings. The rank and file of the agricultural laborers never really grasped his gospel and were therefore ready to return with the priests to the old-time worship of Isis and her consort, so-called Osiris, who was supposed to have been miraculously resurrected from a cruel death at the hands of Set, the so-called god of darkness and evil. So the teaching of immortality for all men was too advanced for the Egyptians. Only kings and the rich were promised a resurrection. Therefore did they so carefully embalm and preserve their bodies in tombs against the day of judgment. But the democracy of salvation and resurrection as taught by Ikhnaton eventually prevailed, even to the extent that the Egyptians later believed in the survival of dumb animals. Although the effort of this Egyptian ruler to impose the worship of one God upon his people appeared to fail, it should be recorded that the repercussions of his work persisted for centuries both in Palestine and Greece, and that Egypt thus became the agent for transmitting the combined evolutionary culture of the Nile and the revelatory religion of the Euphrates to all of the subsequent peoples of the Occident. The glory of this great era of moral development and spiritual growth in the Nile Valley was rapidly passing at about the time the national life of the Hebrews was beginning, and consequent upon their sojourn in Egypt, these Bedouins carried away much of these teachings and perpetuated many of Ikhnaton's doctrines in their racial religion. Point 6. The Salem doctrines in Iran. From Palestine, some of the Melchizedek missionaries passed on through Mesopotamia and to the great Iranian plateau. For more than 500 years, the Salem teachers made headway in Iran, and the whole nation was swinging to the Melchizedek religion when a change of rulers precipitated a bitter a bitter persecution which practically ended the monotheistic teachings of the Salem cult. So the doctrine of the Abrahamic covenant was virtually extinct in Persia when, in that great century of moral renaissance, the 6th before Christ, Zoroaster appeared to revive the smoldering embers of the Salem gospel. This founder of a new religion was a virile and adventurous youth who, on his first pilgrimage to in Mesopotamia, had learned of the traditions of the Caligastia and the Lucifer rebellion, along with many other traditions, all of which had made a strong appeal to his religious nature. Accordingly, as the result of a dream while in he settled upon a program of returning to his northern home to undertake the remodeling of the religion of his people. He had the idea of a God of justice, the Mosaic concept of divinity. The idea of a supreme God was clear in his mind, and he set down all other gods as devils, consigned them to the ranks of the demons of which he had heard in Mesopotamia. He had learned of the story of the 7 master spirits, as the tradition lingered in and accordingly he created a galaxy of 7 supreme gods with Ahura Mazda at its head. These subordinate gods he associated with the idealization of right law, good thought, noble government, holy character, health, and immortality. And this new religion was one of action, work, not prayers and rituals. Its God was a being of supreme wisdom and the patron of civilization. It was a militant religious philosophy which dared to battle with evil, inaction, and backwardness. Zoroaster did not teach the worship of fire, but sought to utilize the flame as a symbol of the pure and wise spirit of universal and supreme dominance. All too true, his later followers did both reverence and worship this symbolic fire. Finally, upon the conversion of an Iranian prince, this new religion was spread by the sword, and Zoroaster, also known as Zarathustra, heroically died in battle for that which he believed was the truth of the Lord of Light. So, Zoroastrianism is the only Urantian creed that perpetuates the Dalmatian and Edenic teachings about the 7 master spirits. While failing to evolve the Trinity concept, it did in a certain way approach that of God the sevenfold. Original Zoroastrianism was not a pure dualism, though the early teachings did picture evil as a time coordinate of goodness. It was definitely eternity submerged in the ultimate reality of the good. Only in later times did the belief gain credence that good and evil contended on equal terms. The Jewish traditions of heaven and hell, and the doctrines of devils as recorded in the Hebrew scriptures. And I want to say, lovely brothers and sisters, this idea of hell and end times and whatsoever are human created ideas. So hell is directly coming from the Hebrew priests and scholars and scribes, um, and so-called rabbis. So that is not of God. There are many believers who think that this is an idea of God, but it is absolutely not the case. While founded on the lingering traditions of Lucifer and Caligustia, Lucifer and Caligustia both have created this world into a gigantic um, um, chaos and confusion. And the human race is still trying to outgrow this state of confusion and chaos. And so because of this, many of the original ancient texts have been distorted and are not 100% trustworthy anymore. There are still gems and jewels in it, but do not completely rely upon them. Use your discernment. Ask the Holy Spirit and Spirit of Truth to help you to find the great pearls in these ancient texts. Were principally derived from the Zoroastrians during the times when the Jews were under the political and cultural dominance of the Persians. Zoroaster, also known as Zarathustra, like the Egyptians, taught the day of judgment. But he connected this event with the end of the world. So he came with this whole idea of the end of the world, which later the Hebrews took over and based a whole doctrine on this so-called end of the world. Even the religion which succeeded Zoroastrianism in Persia was markedly influenced by it. When the Iranian priests sought to overthrow the teachings of Zoroaster, they resurrected the ancient worship of Mithra, and Mithraism spread throughout the Levant and Mediterranean regions, being for some time a contemporary of both Judaism and Christianity. The teachings of Zoroaster thus came successfully to impress three great religions: one, Judaism; two, Christianity; and three, Mohammedanism. But it is a far cry from the exalted teachings and noble psalms of Zoroaster to the modern perversions of his gospel by the Parsis with their great fear of the dead, coupled with the entertainment of beliefs in sophistries which Zoroaster never stooped to countenance. This great man was one of that unique group that sprang up in the 6th century before Christ to keep the light of Salem from being fully and finally extinguished, as it so dimly burned to show man in his darkened world the path of light leading to everlasting life. And then the last one of this paper, number 7, the Salem teachings in Arabia. The Melchizedek teachings of the one God became established in the Arabian desert at a comparatively recent date. As in Greece, so in Arabia, the Salem missionaries failed because of their misunderstanding of Machiaventa's instructions regarding over-organization. Or Machiaventas, is it? But they were not thus hindered by their interpretation of his admonition against all efforts to extend the gospel through military force or civil compulsion. Not even in China or Rome did the Melchizedek teachings fail more completely than in this desert region, so very near Salem itself. Long After the majority of the peoples of the Orient and Occident had become respectively Buddhist and Christian, the desert of Arabia continued as it had for thousands of years. Each tribe worshipped its olden fetish, and many individual families had their own household gods. Long the struggle continued between Babylonian Ishtar and the Hebrew Yahweh, Iranian Ahura, and Christian Father of the Lord Jesus Christ. Never was one concept able fully to displace the others. Here and there throughout Arabia were families and clans that held on to the hazy idea of the one God. Such groups treasured the traditions of Melchizedek, Abraham, Moses, and Zoroaster. There were numerous centers that might have responded to the Jesusonian gospel, but the Christian missionaries of the desert lands were an austere and unyielding group, in contrast with the compromisers and innovators who functioned as the missionaries in the Mediterranean countries. Had the followers of Jesus taken more seriously his injunction to go into all the world and preach the gospel, and had they been more gracious in their preaching, less stringent in collateral social requirements of their own devising, then many lands would gladly have received the simple gospel of the carpenter's son. Arabia among them. Despite the fact that the great Levantine monotheism failed to take root in Arabia, this desert land was capable of producing a faith which, though less demanding in its social requirements, was nonetheless monotheistic. There was only one factor of a tribal, racial, or national nature about the primitive and unorganized beliefs of the desert, and that was the peculiar and general respect which almost all Arabian tribes were willing to pay to a certain black stone fetish in a certain temple at Mecca. This point of common contact and reverence subsequently led to the establishment of the Islamic religion. What Yahweh, the volcano spirit, was to the Jewish Semites, the Kaaba stone became to their Arabic cousins. The strength of Islam has been its clear-cut and well-defined presentation of Allah as the one and only deity. Its weakness, the association of military force with its promulgation, together with its degradation of women, which is still going on. But it has steadfastly held to its presentation of the one universal deity of all, who knows the invisible and the visible. He is the merciful and the compassionate. Truly, God is plenteous in goodness to all men. And when I am sick, it is He who heals me. For whenever as many as three speak together, God is present as a fourth. For is he not the first and the last, also the seen and the hidden? And so we can see that the Bible is in actuality a book that contains many influences, and thus also an Islamic influence, a Buddhist influence, a Hindu influence, and other influences such as Mithraism, Stoicism, and so cynicism and many others. So if it was truly a book written by God, then all these influences were not at all present in such a book. In comparison to the Urantia book, which is completely written by celestials, and who has created all these celestial beings? Well, the Universal Father himself. So this book is in actuality written indeed by the Universal Father himself. And I can say to you, lovely brothers and sisters, for so far in the 2 years of reading this book, I didn't came in connection with human signature at all. And in the Bible, I can at least find 20 different human signatures in it. So I want to say that the Urantia book is really nice to have it along with the Bible, because it fills in the gaps and misunderstandings written in the Bible and missing in the Bible. So it can be a very, how do you say this? Yeah, it can be a very valuable book to have it next to the Bible. The Bible is still containing some pearls and gems, so ask the Spirit of discernment as well as the Spirit of truth and the Holy Spirit to help you to find these gems in the Bible, the gems of truth. All right, I leave this screen share and then I go to the last section of this live book reading, which is the closing section. All right. I want to thank you so much for listening and reading along with me. And I wish you all a beautiful and stunning day filled with a lot of love, discernment, wisdom, and truth, and also ministry to your fellow brothers and sisters as Jesus has taught us to do so. And as last I say, let us listen to a beautiful music of band sound known as B. I'll see you later on when I get back to the God bless you, and see you soon.